All right. So as you may have been notified, this is a part of a planning project. This is our kickoff meeting, our first meeting for planning for coastal resilience in the South Haven and Casco community. To introduce myself, I'm Zach Vega. I'm a community planner with the Land Information Access Association. We're a 501c3 nonprofit based out of Traverse City, but we do work all over the state. One of our primary projects is this coastal communities work, and it's funded by Eagle and NOAA as part of the Michigan Coastal Zone Management Program. We've been doing this work for a few years now. The purpose of this program is exactly what we're going to be doing tonight. We're going to be studying and analyzing potential coastal hazards along the Great Lakes, specifically in your community. And importantly, what we're doing actually tonight is engaging citizens, public officials, and other community stakeholders around these issues so that we can start having discussions on possible steps forward. Where are the gaps? Where are the barriers? Where are the opportunities for possible policies or actions within the community that you can take to improve on your coastal sustainability? The importance of which I'm sure you've noted as the Great Lakes are quite high right now. And all of that is really towards the state's effort and our effort to create coastal hazard ready coastal communities. And at the bottom here, you can see some of our partners. We've got MAP, Michigan Tech, and tonight from U of M, we have Dr. Richard Norton on our coastal resilience team, as we call it, who will help facilitate the discussion that we'll be having tonight based on the video that hopefully you were able to watch on the resilientmichigan.org site and the questions that followed that. So again, everything that goes on with this project will be on the resilientmichigan.org/south_haven URL. You can go there to follow everything that's going on. This video will be posted there as soon as I'm able to get it up there. You can look at some of the past projects that we've done, so master plan updates, master plan chapter updates, strategic plans, things like that. The purpose of this project is to develop a master plan chapter addendum that covers coastal sustainability. And it'll be in a format so that it can be adopted at whatever level you see most fit. So if it's a multi-jurisdictional plan, if one community finds, or if one municipality finds that they want to customize it for their own master plan, you'll be able to do that. But we'll provide a lot of the data, the information, and the results of this public engagement effort all in one document so that you have a clear direction for what action steps are supported by the community and which ones are possible based on the consensus that we'll be building through these first two meetings. And you'll be able to adopt that into your master plans as you see fit. So looking at the project planning process tonight, obviously, is the kickoff meeting. So we will do a quick review of that video that hopefully you're able to watch on the Great Lakes coastal dynamics and sort of the scientific and the legal issues that the Great Lakes dynamics have presented to us, especially in the last few years. And we'll have a group discussion on those 5 questions that were posted to the website. And that will sort of lead us into some overarching ideas of what's going on in the community, get that written down to see, what are some of the larger goals and opportunities that we can develop to improve on sustainability in the South Haven Casco area. So meeting 2, we have our coastal assessment tool that we use to look at the zoning ordinances and master plans and hazard mitigation plans from the municipalities to look for opportunities of what is the community doing already and what, based on those benchmarks that we provide, could the community consider implementing as well. We'll take the findings from that assessment as well as what we talk about tonight and put that together. And then at meeting 2, we'll use all that information to have discussion around some more fine-tuned action steps and priorities that you may want to include in the plan. And then meeting 3, we will present the final draft master plan chapter addendum and discuss all of the findings from our data analysis as well as these engagement methods. So without further ado, the way that this meeting will work, Dr. Norton will review that video really quick. We'll give you an opportunity to ask questions if you have any on any of the concepts that were presented. And then we will break out into breakout rooms and work on each of those questions. So we'll have 5 minutes for each question. We'll come back as an entire group. You'll report out. I'll give all of the ground rules prior, but essentially we're going to be working through as many of those questions as possible, being conscious of your time. We don't want to go too long, but hopefully getting as much done tonight as possible. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Dr. Norton, and I know I've got my screen shared, so feel free to give an indicator when you need me to click the button.
Okay. Thanks, Zach. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Great, super. Okay, hello folks. I'm sorry I can't be in a room with you to see you. It's kind of hard to give a talk like this over a Zoom call. So I can see about 5 of you looking back at me. So that gives me at least some feedback. I'm gonna, whoa, okay. So I'm actually standing in for my colleague, Guy Meadows, who's up at Michigan Tech, and he's been studying Great Lakes shoreline processes and dynamics for better than 30 years. If anybody understands how the Great Lakes work, it's Guy. So I've heard him give this talk a bunch of times, and I've studied with him for quite a while. So I'm going to mirror Guy a little bit. And someone mentioned you loved the fat, happy beach quote. That was Guy, I'm pretty sure. Next, Zach. So the starting point to know is that the lakes fluctuate pretty dramatically. They're large enough to function like ocean coasts in a lot of ways, much more so than a typical inland lake. But they're different in that they're not tidal. They don't go up and down twice a day. At the same time, they do fluctuate pretty dramatically in terms of their standing water levels. And they do that over cycles within cycles within cycles. So you all are coastal residents, you know this, but they fluctuate daily, they fluctuate seasonally. They just move back and forth constantly, but there is kind of an average water level over the course of a year that the hydrologists have mapped out. And they even do it decadally. We came off of an unusually long period of low water that stretched from about 1999 through 2014. And that allowed a whole lot of sand to build up on the beaches, and I'll talk more about that in a bit. One of the striking things about the lakes is when they come back up or they drop, they go really quickly. So we went very quickly from about 2010 to where we are 10 years later in a pretty dramatic elevation. And so, as you know, we're at an all-time high or really close to all-time highs, and they're just now starting to dip a little bit. So next. So one of the implications of this, I don't think this image was in the video that you watched, but you ought to know that there's generally about a 1 foot per year on average background erosion rate on the Lake Michigan, or a recession rate that's caused by erosion. So in other words, the lakes are sandy, gravelly shorelines and bottoms, and they're geologically young features. They're basically getting wider and shallower over time. And so that means if you're on a shoreline, you're going to see the shoreline move gradually landward about 1 foot per year on average. So this is just an image, John, from Guy Meadows Research Center's shoreline erosion, shoreline viewer. And it's to illustrate the movement of the blue line shows you where the shoreline was over an 80-year period of time. The golden colored lines are where the bluff line was. And then the red line is an estimation of where it will be likely in the next 30 years. So there's a whole lot of infrastructure and homes that have been built really close to the water's edge that are at risk because of this background erosional process. Next slide. So this is an image right at the Lake Michigan border. And I think Guy probably used some of these images in that video that you watched, but it's pretty remarkable. So this is a really big, fat, inflated beach that accumulated because of that really long period of low lake waters, and the lakes pushed up a whole lot of sand onto the beach. And you can see then in the next slide that was taken in 2018, as the lakes have come back up, and but virtually all of that beach is gone. And there was a home that's just now recently been completed, and there's already some rubble that's starting, or rock that's starting to show up, that they put in front of that structure when they started to build it to try and protect it. Next slide. That's what it looked like a year later from the top. So now the beach is virtually gone, and back to about where it was in 2001 at that, 1886, when the last all-time high was. Next slide. And now it's moving even further back. And so the folks who built that home immediately had to armor to try and protect it. And that's causing some damage along the shoreline. Next slide. So effectively, here's a message that we're trying to convey, is that hard engineering solutions cause adverse impacts to adjacent properties into the nearshore area. And if I could operate the little cursor, I would point. I don't think you can see it, but that top left image is armoring structures that was put in to protect a property. Thanks, Zach. And that's, you can see it's kind of accelerating scour now on that adjacent property. And then the image just below that helps to illustrate, if you look really carefully, there's a big, fat, happy, sandy beach. And then look just offshore. You can see the sandbar that's sitting right there. That sand is moving easily back and forth in that nearshore zone. Now, if you drop down to where that the armoring structures are put in, you can see the sandbars disappeared. It's been scoured away. So the sand that's needed to replace the beach and keep it natural is getting pushed offshore because of those revetment structures and the armoring, the wave reflection that's happening. So not only do these revetment structures, apparently the lake starts to scour away the sand from in front of it, but it also starts to carry it away from the beach. And so it starts to become not available anymore to replenish the beach. The other image there to the right is revetment structures or groin structures. Groins are structures that stick out perpendicular from the shore. And the message there is when you put in one, you end up having to put in more than one because they start robbing Peter to pay Paul, as they say, as they catch sand. And then when you stop putting them in, at the very right-hand part of that, you can see where the bluff is starting to fail. And it appears that some of that was accelerated. That's actually an image of on Lake in Wisconsin, on Lake Michigan, where they've got really steep slopes. And it was one large campus groin system that they put in that's worked where they put it, but it's causing problems downdrift. Next slide. The other message that I've learned from Guy is that shoreline armoring is not a permanent solution. The lakes are incredibly powerful and they're remorseless. And so you can see on this image where new shoreline armoring has been put in, you can see further out lakeward where the old armoring failed and has been washed into the lake. So eventually, unless you keep building up and repairing and replacing the shoreline armoring as the lake is working on it, it's going to fail and get pulled in to the lake and then leave underwater hazards and debris or a problem for navigation. Next slide. And then the other long-term effect, there's growing evidence that even when the lakes go down, if there's been enough rock revetment put in so that it's starving the sand supply that you need to have to replenish the natural beach, you're going to lose the natural beach. There will be no walkable beach left, and you'll just have a stone revetment like this image. And that it's looking like that's going to be true even when the lakes go back down. Of course, there's a lot of uncertainty about when they'll go back down, how long they'll stay down, and what all of that will do. But here's Guy's take on the ultimate fate of revetments over time. They'll just get washed back into the lake and then leave a rubble field. So next slide. So there are alternatives to that. They're not all perfect. It's better than hard armoring is to look for soft armoring solutions, soft landscaping solutions that will have some ability to protect the shoreline. They're not going to be as permanent, but you also won't lose the beach. So there's part of a trade-off. Next slide. And then other options are if you have a sand source, if you've got a river outlet that's being dredged by the Army Corps of Engineers, and you've got a ready sand supply, it might be economically feasible to nourish the beach. You definitely want to do shoreline stormwater management to control water. You might think about elevating structures to get them out of harm's way, or ultimately start moving structures back, managed relocation. Next slide. So the good news is it looks like the lakes are on their way back down. At least for this season. We don't know if they're going to stay still above average or if they'll start dropping like they did a while ago. The best guess I'm hearing right now is they're probably going to stay high for a while. There's so much water in the system, and there's so much water up in Lake Superior right now that they're probably going to stay high. So the question is, will they kind of hover above average, or will they start spiking back up again? And the bottom line on that is, who knows? We just don't have the ability to predict out that far ahead to know for sure. So all of that lays out the kind of physical system dynamics that are going along on the shoreline. Next slide. So what I do then is come in and talk about, okay, what are the legal and the policy implications given what we know about dynamic shorelines? And if you didn't pick up on this, I can't remember what all we talked about in the video that you watched, but that's a house that was built in St. Joseph, Michigan. And it's kind of become, I hate to say that, of houses kind of that should not have been built. It was built too close to the water's edge and it's become problematic. And so I'm going to close my talk out with coming back to that house. But we're dealing with coastal community resilience, and that raises the question, what's coastal and what's resilient? So coastal is basically being on the water. That's what you all are. And then resilience, community resilience, you can think of as learning how to adapt and respond to shocks to the system and to stresses in the system. And you're getting both of them in a big way. So we're seeing increased storminess, more and more intense storms that are dropping more rainfall that are overwhelming infrastructural systems. So that's Detroit that was hit by a major storm a couple of years ago. And then the picture on the right is Houghton that was hit 2 years ago by two 500-year storm events. In other words, 500-year storm events are becoming more like the 100-year storm event. They're just becoming more frequent, and it totally overwhelmed the city's infrastructural system and did a whole lot of damage. Those are the shocks that we're having to confront. The stresses are these long-term ongoing processes, the erosional processes and the movement of sand dunes that you have to kind of, that's nature operating the way nature is going to operate, and we have to start planning for that and recognizing it. Okay, so next slide. So now what are some of the legal implications? So we have on the Great Lakes, all eight of the Great Lakes states have adopted what's called the public trust doctrine. And I can come back to that and answer more questions if you have them, but some key things to take out of that are two key things, that if you own waterfront property, if you own shorefront property on a Great Lake, you have what the courts refer to as a movable freehold. If you have a title that says you own to the water's edge, then your property boundary moves back and forth naturally and automatically as the lakes go up and down, as an erosional and accretional processes happen. So when the lakes drop and the beaches gain, you've gained beach, you own that land. So that's the benefit of being on a shoreline and a natural process. Next slide. The downside is as the lakes erode away the shoreline and recede landward, you're losing naturally your property to the lake. Submerged lands of the Great Lakes are owned by the state. That's been part of the public trust doctrine, which has been a doctrine recognized by the state of Michigan since it became a state. So the first thing to know is when you own shorefront property, your boundary is automatically moving. Next thing. So the other thing about the public trust doctrine is this public has a right of access and use along the shoreline. So if you own shorefront property, you own to the water's edge, but it's as if you have an easement across your property that allows people to stroll. So this is the Glass v. Geckel decision that reaffirmed this, and it means people have a right to walk. I tell folks they don't have a right to have a picnic in front of your property if you're a shorefront property owner, but they have kind of like a sidewalk. They have a right to stroll along the beach. And so the way we know where that right extends to is what's referred to as the ordinary high water mark. And again, it's kind of a complicated concept, but I'll just quickly say we have two ordinary high water marks in Michigan. One is the natural ordinary high water mark, and that was established by the Glass v. Geckel decision. And it basically says that people have the right to walk along the dry sandy beach. So that stretch of beach is walkable. In a period now where you maybe have water all the way up to the Tolva Bluff and it's impassable, there's no right of access there because it's above ordinary high water. So there are periods when people don't to the beach because of these natural processes. But when the lake goes back down and the sandy beach comes back, that's a walkable beach. That's below the ordinary high water mark. Next slide. The high water mark we have is the regulatory ordinary high water mark, and that's based on an elevation-based standard. And one thing we've learned from recent study is it's a really bad standard to use. It's really hard to cite where exactly is it hitting the beach. But nonetheless, that's the standard we use. And basically it involves drawing an elevation above sea level, our benchmark called the International Great Lakes Datum, figuring out where it hits the beach, and then lakeward of that beach, that's got the public trust interest, and you have to get a permit from the state to put an armoring. If you're landward of it, local governments can regulate that through zoning, but unless you're in a critical dune area, you don't have to get a permit from the state. So So another thing to know about our public trust doctrine, 2 different ordinary high water marks. Next slide. So this is just, again, to reiterate, in the really have 3 core options to deal with rising water levels. One is to armor the shore to try and protect structures. The second is to nourish the shoreline, nourish the beach. And the third is to relocate. The benefit of armoring is you can protect a structure for a longer period of time. The downside is you're going to lose the natural beach and you may do damage to neighboring properties. The benefit of nourishing the beach is that you're giving a soft solution that may buy you time while the lakes are high. The downside is all of that sand could be lost in a single storm. So in a way, you're kind of, I've heard an engineer say, it's like throwing $100 bills on the beach. You're just going to lose that sand eventually. So you have to approach that with some caution. And then the third option, relocating property, that's the same house that I pointed out in St. Joseph. They actually did pick up that house and pull it back. So it's possible to move even large structures. The downside of that, it's expensive for the property owner, although it may not be that much more expensive than an armor seawall. The benefit of that is it's going to maintain the natural beach. It's going to maintain that public trust access. And it's going to be, over the long term, the least expensive because you're not going to be constantly battling the moving, shifting shoreline. Next slide. In the longer term, how do we get there? How do we figure out how to better plan for these conditions and figure out where does it make sense to armor? Where does it make sense to nourish? And where does it make sense to relocate? And you can do that through planning methods that we've developed, and we call it decision-centered scenario-based planning. And I'm not going to go to that in detail here, but just point out it involves mapping where your high hazard areas are. That's the image in the top right corner. And then mapping out what you currently have in terms of structures and what you could have through build out, analyzing build out patterns. And then figuring out where are the really bad risks and where do we want to deal with those and how do we plan for that into the future. Next slide. And then once you've done that, you can start thinking about, okay, what are the low impact infrastructure development policies we might adopt? Where do we want to make sure we're using good infiltration systems? Where do we want to make sure we're dealing with the flooding? A lot of coastal communities, actually, a lot of their risk is in the riverine system, not on the shorefront. It's in the rivers that could flood out as they're draining into the lakes. And so you want to really manage your stormwater. The other option then is through your zoning to start adopting setbacks. And I don't know, Zach, if you can do it, but in the bottom panel of that image, the St. Joseph Edgewater Beach Overlay District, you can just see the house sticking out past. Go to your left. Right there is the house. That's the house. So when they adopted that setback, that put the house lakeward of the setback. And when the lakes came back up, the city informed the property owner, we're not going to give you a permit to allow you to armor to protect the house because we told you not to build a house there in the first place. They did. They just didn't have the zoning code to tell them they couldn't build. So that's why the folks picked up that house and moved it back. So they had the zoning in place when the lakes came back up to respond to that. Next slide. So again, there are other options, and that's one thing we're working now with this grant with the Michigan Coastal Management Program is to better fine tune what those might be on a Great Lakes shorefront, but a lot of them are the same. There are things you can be looking into in terms of soft armoring, bank stabilization, next slide, elevating structures, trying to manage stormwater, maybe doing some beach renourishment if the conditions are right, and then maybe thinking relocating. Next slide. And again, just to point out, it's people go immediately to the idea of armoring. We've got to protect our house, but relocating, it can be a feasible option and should be something to be considered if the conditions are right. So that's the end of my presentation. So I guess this is the place to stop and say, anybody have any questions? I'll do my best to answer them if you do.
Yeah, feel free to unmute yourselves if you have any questions.
I got a question.
Yes, sir.
From the previous presentation and now looking at this one, one of the things I've taken away is these, I think they call them groins, these structures that stick out. And
Yep.
you called it taking from Peter to pay Paul. It seems like all it does is stop the erosion to the north of those structures, but everything to the south gets worse. And what do we do in a town like South Haven where we have two lighthouses, one in particular, and if you look at the North Beach, no problem, I don't think, losing much sand. The south side is losing all the sand. And it sounds like from what you've said in the other presentations, not a whole lot we can do other than nourishing it and hoping we can retain it. Are we better off, and I know this sounds radical, taking that whole structure out so we don't have a groin right there, right where the river is? I mean, what do communities do where we have
Yeah.
these things sticking out all over the whole coastal area of Lake Michigan?
Yeah, that's a really that's a really hard question to answer. So I think that structure is not just a lighthouse structure, but it's a Army Corps of Engineer navigational structure too, right? So that's a problem. You're exactly right. What those structures are doing is functioning like groins. And in your case, because the primary movement of sand in Southwest Michigan is from north to south, it has the effect of trapping sand on the north side of the structure and starving sand on the south side of the structure. So one option would be to take it out, but you're going to have to deal with the Army Corps and the navigational, the protection, marina protection that it provides. So realistically, I'm guessing that's probably not likely to happen. So what St. Joseph is doing is they are having their harbor is dredged by the Corps, and they're able to take advantage of that dredging to re-nourish the beach that's south of their structure. I don't know if you're able to do that. I don't know if the Corps dredges your river or not, but that's really, if you're going to have groin structures like that, or even armoring, and you want to maintain some kind of natural beach, really the only option is to nourish. And so now that's a long-term cost that you're looking at, or frankly, to let it go. And then you just know that you're accelerating the erosion south of that. And that has implications for the folks who own the properties there too.
Dick, this is Kate Hosier, and yes, we have done nourishment in the past. I think that was funded by the Corps, and additionally, the city's harbor was dredged, I think, in 18 or 19. That was paid by the Corps, and the sand was replaced and nourished on the South Beach.
Yep. I hope that makes sense and answered your question.
So,
Any other?
sorry, were there any other questions before we go into the breakout rooms? It sounded like there was one more person before I cut them off.
I had a quick question, if you can hear me.
Yeah.
We've talked about dredging the river in, and if you go down to the Carolinas and in Florida, they have large scale sand dredging, ocean in. And so they're building, a football field of sand. Is there any consideration to do larger scale sand dredging all along the Lake Michigan shoreline?
So my understanding from talking to Eagle staff is that they have been very reticent to allow dredging from the lake bottom, the submerged lands, because that's sand owned by the state. And so they don't want to try and solve one problem in a way that creates more problems by disturbing habitat that the lake bottom provides. Having said that, I've also heard informally from them that if somebody did the right study and could show that there was a sand source that could be dredged to nourish beaches without doing any kind of ecological harm or that kind of damage, they might be amenable to permitting that kind of activity. So if that's the case, now the next question is, who's going to pay for that? And so what's going on the ocean coasts? Frankly, you and I are paying through our taxes to re-nourish North Carolina's beaches, because that's all being paid by the federal government through the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. And so there's some equity considerations there about who's receiving the benefits of that nourishing project and who's paying for it. The other thing I'll tell you, I've heard this. I don't know that I'm not for sure that it's true, but I've heard that in Miami, where they re-nourish all the time to maintain their beaches, because they're really getting hit by sea level rise, they're having to go far, far away to get their supplies because they've pulled so much sand out of the nearshore area that it's getting yet more expensive. So, nourishment, like the engineer said, is like throwing $100 bills on the beach. It's going to be a long-term expensive proposition. So it may make sense to do that if you've got public infrastructure that you're generating revenue through the city, that it makes sense for the city to expend some money to maintain that beach. That may be a good option in limited cases, but my guess is in terms of a large scale renourishment project to maintain the beaches, huge equity questions about who's going to pay for that and who's really benefiting. Does that
Yeah,
make sense?
I only say that because we've got homeowners, you know, throwing down $100, $200, $300,000 for rock in hopes of one day having a beach again. So I think you'd find funding sources if you could do it in a way that was efficient. That's why I bring it up. I think
Yeah.
it'd be
Well,
an
that's,
interesting
that's
question.
another possibility. Maybe, you know, property owners, maybe, gosh, I'm going to probably get in trouble for this, but, you know, maybe there's an assessment to apply for shorefront property owners instead of them spending lots of money to build a revetment. Maybe that would go into contributing to helping to do a beach nourishment project.
I think there already is an assessment for beachfront property owners. Richard, I have a question on what percentage of the Lake Michigan shoreline has been armored up until now? And based upon permits that have been issued, how much more is going to be armored?
Yeah. So I can't give you exact numbers because it's changing too. Eagle has issued, I think I heard something like 2,700 permits for individual structures since the lake started coming back up. I want to say, Zach, check me if I'm wrong. I want to say upwards of maybe 60% of the shoreline on Lake Michigan has some kind of armoring on it. In some places that's continuous. In other places it's kind of piecemeal because they permit these structures parcel by parcel. So a substantial portion, there are still people looking desperately to armor now. So they're still processing permits. How long will that go? And you know, how much more of the shoreline will be armored? That's a really good question. I don't have a good bead.
Well,
we're headed that way.
yeah, the reason I asked the question is, and I am a shoreline property owner that has armored. In fact, there's 2 excavators out in front of my house right now. And I'm spending my children's inheritance doing this. But you know, they're fine and we're going to be okay. But here's the question. Is the issue those that have armored, or is the issue those who have chosen not to armor? All the photos I've seen demonstrate to me that those who have armored are protected, who've done it right. Those who have not have suffered severe erosion. And if the sand theory is correct, that if you armor, you no longer nourish the bottom of the lake. If the whole shoreline was armored, what would be the impact to Lake Michigan?
There wouldn't be any beach left. If the more that, I mean, the other thing that's happening, the more that you armor the shoreline, the more you're starving the sand supply that's needed to replenish the natural beach. So the more that people are armoring, the more we're starving that sand supply, the more we're likely to end up with one sea wall of stone, and there won't be any natural beach left to walk. That's where we're headed until the lake finally takes those armoring structures back into the lake. I mean, the other thing we know is you're investing a lot in those structures, but that's not permanent. The lake is going to keep pounding on them. So, you know, you've taken steps, and I totally get that. And I don't want to sound like I'm hard-hearted in this. I understand shorefront property owners who have homes who are, you know, desperately want to protect them. Totally understandable. So you've taken steps to protect them, that you've invested a lot of money, but that's not a permanent solution either. So you've just delayed how long it'll be before the lake finally takes that shoreline back. And then the question becomes, if and when that seawall fails, who's going to take the rubble out? That's going to create navigational problems. So it's a pretty stark trade-off. The issue is, you know, you've protected the structures, but you've done it at the expense of the beach. If you decide you're going to protect the beach, that probably means there will be structures that have to come out that you can't. The lake is either going to take them, or people are going to need to pick them up and move them back before that happens. And unhappily, that's in many places, that's the, you know, one of the questions we pose to you is, if you can't protect the beach house, you know, what are you going to do? Either protect the beach or the beach house. There may be places where you can't do both.
I'd like to take this offline with you and me, just to discuss the science behind the theory that if the entire lake was armored, you would never have a beach back.
Sure. Yeah.
Really,
yeah.
talk about that science with you.
Yeah, and really, honestly, the best person to talk to is Guy Meadows. You know, I'm conveying what I've learned from him, so he can speak more authoritatively to the science. But I'm happy to chat with you too.
Richard,
Yeah.
Richard, based upon the slides you've shown us and the theories behind it and the practicality, when somebody armors, they're not just harming the neighbor. It's the neighbor and the neighbor and the neighbor and the neighbor in our area to the south. So we have to keep the broader picture in mind. It's not just the next neighbor. It's the rest of us who are down south of that armoring.
Yeah, I do know, you know, that arming structures have downdrift effects. I think how bad, you know, how extensive they are is a function of the sand sediment, the sand supply, and the nature of the structure. But you're right, it could well extend beyond multiple property owners.
Dr. Norton,
Yes, sir.
and Zach, perhaps, have you shared this information with Eagle? Are you working with Eagle, that we're working from the same common base of knowledge? Because I'll tell you, as a planner, sometimes we get in a situation and, you know, Eagle makes a recommendation. We're going, well, if the state said it's okay, it must be. I don't mean to make it sound that simplistic. We do give it a little more careful study than that. But I'm certainly, from the presentation I saw and what I'm hearing tonight, I'm getting very different information than I think I've gotten before.
Yeah.
That Eagle is acting on. And I just wondered, are we acting in agreement, in alignment with each other, or are we setting up a situation where we've got different sources of information competing against each other?
I don't know that it's so much different sources of information as much as different missions, and recognize that Eagle is not homogenous, right? There are different groups of people within Eagle doing different things. So my guess is you've been talking to the permit writers who are charged with deciding whether or not to issue permits. And they know this science pretty well, although some of this stuff I'm describing to you is really coming to the fore as the lakes have come up, and it's really made it more apparent, oh my gosh, what's going on here? The permit writers are in this really difficult place. They have this dual mission of protecting the public trust and allowing people to take reasonable steps to protect their property. And so they're trying to navigate that. And you know, frankly, the lakes came up so fast when they came up, and so many people started to armor so quickly. And we have a very limited, you know, we don't like government, so we don't have very many state staffers to help us process these permits. So they just accelerated the permitting. You know, they responded to the pressures they were feeling, and they accelerated the permit review process. And so they've made decisions to allow armoring structures to go in. Now the research is, you know, the program that I'm working with, the Michigan Coastal Management Program, isn't issuing permits. We have the luxury of being able to step back and say, what's going on? What are the longer term implications of this? Maybe we should be thinking about the long-term implications. And so it is Eagle, but you're hearing it from different folks kind of coming at it from different perspectives. And, you know, everybody's acting in good faith. I think we're all trying to do the right thing. It's trying to figure out what's the right thing, given the uncertainties and given these incredible dynamics that are going on and these really competing goals that we're trying to reconcile. So does that make sense?
Can I ask a quick question?
Yes, sir.
About 2 summers ago, we had what they call speaker series. We had different speakers come in, and one of the speakers was supposedly an expert or a historian on Lake Michigan. And one of the things he said, I've never forgotten, he said, there's X number of cities along the coastal line, especially on the west side, Chicago side of the coast in Wisconsin, that are allowed to take X number of gallons of water out per day, X number of millions of gallons out, and that's it. That's tightly controlled by some association of all the Great Lakes. My question is real simple. If we have these problems with erosion and high water, and we know there's cities that can use more water like Chicago, couldn't some group get together and talk to the states or this association and say, for the next 5 years, let them take X million more gallons of water out, bring the whole level down a foot or two and stop this, and we wouldn't have to do all this other work and all these other expenses, and we would be nourishing cities that need water. Or is that high in the sky?
Well, two things come to mind with that. That's there are folks out there who are arguing that in fact we do have outlets out of the Great Lakes that we should be accelerating. So the Chicago Sanitary Canal is an outlet from the Great Lakes. And the drainage out through the system out to the Lawrence Seaway is a drainage system. And the argument is we should dredge the rivers deeper and allow it to drain to lower the lake levels. And two responses. One is all of the engineers tell me the amount of change that we could affect through that kind of engineering is just tiny compared to the natural level of fluctuation. It really wouldn't make that much of a difference. And then from a policy perspective, your idea of maybe we should let more communities outside of the basin take our water while it's high presumes that when the lakes go back down, we're going to stop letting that water go out of the basin. But I would suggest that probably wouldn't happen. If you've let water out and people are now depending on Great Lakes water to feed their systems, they're not going to freely give that up when the lake stops moving. So you might have created a policy situation where not only have you dropped the lakes for a period of time, you're going to start draining the lakes. And boy, let me tell you, there are people outside of our Great Lakes Basin who would love to get a hold of our water. And having said that we can't affect lake levels that much, it is entirely possible from an engineering perspective to start draining the Great Lakes permanently if we did that. So, the Russians drained the Aral Sea, which is about the size of Lake Erie, pretty quickly to feed cotton. In a way that probably wasn't a good thing. So that kind of policy solution, I would be really nervous about pursuing, to be honest.
All right. Any other questions before we get into our breakout rooms? I don't think we'll have time to get through all of the questions, and that's okay. I think an alternative, we'll put them on the Resilient Michigan site and email that out to all of you so that you can fill out the questions on your own. But in the meantime, I'd like to at least get to a couple of these right now. So what we're going to do, and let me share my screen really quick so I can show you what we're going to be doing. This might take a second. Can you all see that? Breakout rooms, Dick, is that up? Okay. All right, so what we're going to do, there's about a little over 30 of us, so we're going to break into probably 5 breakout rooms. It'll be a mix. You'll be with somebody who's on probably a different planning commission than you are. So what we're going to do, and I'll extend this time a little bit just because we have so many people, but let's take about 10 minutes to discuss the first question that I'll put up there. Each group, once you're in the breakout room, please designate one person to take notes and then report out to everyone. So typically there's somebody that likes to do that. Just find them in your group. Ground rules, obviously be respectful of everyone's opinion. You might not agree with everything that you hear or the idea that's presented, but we want to make sure that everyone feels welcome to participate. We also want to make sure that there's time for everyone in the group to share. So, if there's one person in the group that's dominating the conversation, please be aware of that, of yourself. We want to make sure that everyone gets a chance to talk, but also cognizant of the fact that we will have these questions online by the end of the week so that you can answer them on your own time. But I want to make sure that we get these at least the first question answered and possibly the second. And this will help us get kind of an idea of those overarching issues that you're dealing with. So question 1, and I'll get the breakout room set up after this. What are the current challenges the South Haven Casco community is facing because of changes in the Great Lake? All right, so I'll stop sharing. Let me set up that breakout room really quick. All right, so remember 10 minutes. There will be a warning when the breakout room is about to end. Remember, assign one person to report out, and we'll report out in the next 10 minutes. And let me make sure I've got my settings correct. I'm supposed to report out to that group. Go ahead and do so. On that first question of what are the current challenges the South Haven Casco community is facing because of the Great Lakes?
Hey, this is Dave Campbell, Casco Township, chair of the Planning Commission, and We had representatives from, well, we had the two supervisors from South Haven Township and Casco, as well as Downtown Authority with South Haven itself. We had a number of issues that we're facing. I'll take the more from the South Haven internal ones, the public safety on the beaches, the piers, erosion down on the Riverwalk, American Legion, tourism in general was mentioned as having an impact on all three of the communities, or the impact the lake is having on tourism. We dealt with the individual property owners, the armament issues, homes, trying to protect our homes. Also with Ross and Allen, there was discussion on the sewer plants, the water, the marinas, and the high level or the high water level impact on on those assets. From the individual township perspectives, we're looking at impacts on our parks, whether it be creeks in the case of South Haven Township, or whether it be underground water in the case of Casco Township, eroding roads right on the top of the bluff. We also had a separate community that has a community well that is down on the beach. It's armored now, but the question is, what is the potential impact, or how long that will hold up? And those were the major points that I written down as a result of our discussion.
Okay, that was pretty quick. I tried to take notes as quickly as possible. Is there anything I'm missing from that? I've got public safety, the tourism impact, property owners protecting their homes, and the kind of the issue, the conflict that creates between different property owners. So the impact on the public infrastructure, such as the roads, water, what are the natural features that are being impacted, such as the bluffs, and then some of that other infrastructure that's close, and that the communities can note on the individual level. Is there anything I missed with that?
I just looked at my list. It looks like you've covered it all.
Okay. All right. Thank you, David. So from that second group, let me take a look here. Let me stop sharing for a second so I can see who was in which breakout room. All right, breakout room 2, that was with Janet, Judy, Kevin, Linda, Michael. Who was the reporter out for that one?
Travis Sullivan. I was the reporter.
Okay.
I think a lot of the things that were just covered by the last group were also discussed in ours. We discussed our within the city of South Haven specifically, but it affects any of the townships that also receive water service from the city, the water supply, and the sewage system. And so infrastructure, I know that was hit by the last group. Revetment requests, and the issues caused by some homeowners pursuing revetments, some not, and the potentially negative impact that can have on folks that are not seeking them. We discussed right now that emotion seems to be driving a lot of the decision making versus facts and data. Obviously, emotion, you're dealing with people's homes, and so certainly that's going to be an emotional. There's going to be an emotional pull there. The competing interests between neighbors, again, that kind of gets back to revetments and armoring, who's willing to and who's not. To expand on that a little bit, where it seems to be even more of an issue is when subdivisions decide that they're going to. You're not dealing just with one parcel anymore. Now you're dealing with 10 or 20 homeowners all deciding to do it, and the exponential impact that can have on surrounding properties. The recent uptick in the intensity of storms that are hitting the shoreline. And then I think that pretty much covers what we discussed.
All right, thank you very much. Looking at group 3. That was with Luke, Mark, Scott, Bob. Who was the designated reporter?
This is Mark Odland from South Haven Township Planning Commission. Our group addressed 4 separate issues. The first was infrastructure issues, and that includes not only our water and wastewater treatment plant here in South Haven that potentially is at risk, but also water and sewer lines throughout the city and the townships. The second major category that we addressed was safety issues. And this gets into obviously high water, people being washed off the pier, increased calls for rescues for from shays, drownings, lots of ongoing issues involving safety. The third has to do with just plain access. A lot of people purchased their properties so that they would have the ability to walk long sections of the beach. And because so many revetments have been built, it's impossible to do that anymore. The hope, of course, is that when the water recedes, that will improve. But based upon what we're hearing tonight, that may not be the case. Fourthly, we just talked about a big category of conflict issues, conflicts between neighbors. The last group, Travis talked about the emotional issues involving home ownership and loss of homes. But there's this other issue of those that are on the shoreline, those that aren't, and potentially the polarization that we're seeing involving those groups. And then fifth, there was I think a great question asked. It wasn't an issue, but it's a question that I think has to do with, gets into solution. Where does the sand go that comes off North Beach in the spring? After, it builds up, the sand fences are there, it's trucked away. Where does that go? And that's all we had. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Group 4, we had Clark, Janice, Phil, Rosalie, and Thomas. Who was the lucky reporter in that group?
Clark will do it.
Who's been volunteered to do it, I guess?
Clark, are you there? He's not answering.
I'm not answering, no.
Do you want to talk? Because we didn't take notes.
We didn't take notes. I can say primarily what we discussed were, I guess, the multiple frustrations and issues and how they all interconnect with potential projects here in the city. So every time we talked about things we have done in the past, would we have made different decisions with the information that we're discussing today? And how could we make different decisions considering the decisions that we've already made? As an example, we've approved multiple shoreline projects. Could we suddenly just say we're not doing anymore with the historical precedent that we've already set? So I think that was most of our discussions. I wish we would have gone more into having a better output, but I think we were getting there. We were enjoying each other's company and having a great discussion, but we didn't look at the end game.
If I could just add to that too, I mean, we did touch on the public safety of it, the tourism. I think all of that went, that was kind of went unsaid. We already know that, but how do you move forward? You know, learning about this setbacks and new development, I think that's some great opportunity with new development. The challenge we have along the shore is these are houses, and with the new permits with revetments, we're just compounding the problem now, and it's very worrisome.
Thank you, Rosaline. You actually, you may have skipped ahead a little bit to the question too, but that's okay. Thank you. All right, let's see. We got one more group, and that was Kathy, George, Joe, Kate, Maureen, and Scott.
Well, I was the note taker and I'll be the reporter. We identified many of the same challenges that have already been spoken here today. Number one, not all these are in order, but critical infrastructure that benefits all of our communities that are located on both Lake Michigan and the Black River are in danger. The wastewater treatment plant, the water filtration plant. We did also note the economic impact of high water, the impacts to boating, the impacts on tourism, the impacts on housing values and affected rental revenue. 3, access. It is causing issues with people not being able to access the beaches and walking on them. 4th, there was concerns raised about the lighthouse. It was just recently renovated. The water levels keep going up after a number of years. Could our iconic lighthouse that we all identify with be in trouble? 5, safety, more dangerous water conditions, high water piers, safety issues with water safety. 6, if dredging is going to be needed and the water levels go down, are the spoils or the dredging, are they going to be clean enough for us to use as nourishment? And that's not just in the channel area, but if you go farther up, sometimes you find that the sediment is contaminated and cannot be used for nourishment, but in fact must be at a very high cost put to a landfill. And 7, houses that are built too close to the shoreline. So we've seen that there may be some zoning impacts and maybe we need to have stricter setbacks, but seeing that people are still building too close to the shoreline, not knowing what the history is with the fluctuations. And then 8, competing interests that I think have already been talked about, personal desires versus community standards.
All right, thank you. Okay, before we move on, make sure my screen is still shared. Before we move on, is there anything in these, well, I guess, sticky notes? They would usually be sticky notes for all the planners out there that we're missing. Anything from the conversation that we're forgetting before we move on?
Zach, one thing I forgot to mention, just to answer Mark's question, the city does not actually truck any of the sand off of North Beach. We actually just flatten down the beach. We would need a permit to move the sand off the beach, which we don't have. And so all we do is flatten down all the naturally occurring sand that builds up into those large mounds. We just flatten it down.
That means it gets pushed into the lake.
No, that means it's flattened on the beach. We can't actually push any sand off into the beach. Again, that would need a permit.
So then the beach gets higher every year?
The North Beach does have a lot more sand than the South Beach due to littoral drift and those kind of things. I think
Okay.
Guy Meadows or maybe Dick Norton can speak to those, but we flatten it down. We cannot actually push it into the beach, or I'm sorry, into the water.
Okay, thank you. All right, let's.
I have one more point to add, and that is some properties do not have the room to move back and relocate. So you've got landlocked situations, which are probably more than we would expect. Thank you.
Thank you, Judy. Okay, let's move on to question 2, and we'll go back into those same breakout rooms. So question 2, is the community doing everything it might to address coastal community resiliency through its planning and zoning? If not, why not? And so I know the planning and zoning is obviously going to be different for the 3 municipalities. There might be some overlap. Try to look at the bigger picture, and then if it's impossible to do so because the policies are so drastically different, we'll just note that in the notes. But let's look at that question. So again, is the community doing everything it might to address coastal community resiliency through its planning and zoning? And where there are gaps in that, why is that occurring? Okay, so I'll get those breakout rooms started up. And again, we'll have 10 minutes. And if I kind of notice that the conversations are really good and still going, I'll keep them open. But let's try to shoot for that 10-minute mark. Everybody.
Oh,
Hopefully that was enough time for everyone. So yeah, let's do the same thing. Let's see who is in that first group. Was that enough time for everyone? More or less? Seeing some nods. Okay. All right, so that first breakout room, that was Alan, Bob, David, Ross, Tom. Do we have a reporter for that first group? I think, David, you might be talking right now, but you might be muted out.
Yeah, I would. Thanks for reminding me.
Yeah, I just unmuted you. We're good.
Are we good? Okay.
Were you the reporter for the first group?
Yeah, Dave Campbell.
Okay, yep. You're good to go.
Well, we started off with just me doing everything it might do to address the coastal resiliency, and and one of us stepped up and said, "Well, no, okay." And then why not? And the suggestion was maybe we just didn't have the knowledge at the time when we were making various decisions as to what might be the process or the steps to undertake. And secondly, maybe we didn't have the will to do it since we were looking at it as independent within the 3 communities. And the bottom line is we concluded that we needed to attempt to find some balance on the issues between the communities as we move forward. Some of the specific issues, and one of our participants said, 5 years ago, it seemed like things were, going along pretty well. And I guess going from another part of this discussion from the high water levels to the low water levels, and both of those have their own separate issues on the community. Protecting the bluffs and the erosion versus needing to dredge the water like we did 5, 6, 7 years ago to make the channels deeper, for instance. We also talked about it's more than just the individual townships in the city. It seems as though the state may need to be a little bit more more proactive in assisting with dealing with these issues. The setbacks within the townships for housing on the bluff, especially in the individual townships. We also talked about again, not planning for the long haul, or not anticipating the ups and downs of the lake when we make decisions like putting in marinas. And I guess that was probably the major ones that I've made my notes on here.
Is what I wrote down, did that capture what you said? Your mic cut in a little bit there. I had a little bit of difficulty, but.
Need to find balance between the 3 communities, protecting the bluff, beach nourishment. These were kind of in high, protecting the bluffs and the beach nourishment in high water periods is the issue. In low water periods, I mean, up here in Glen Shores, we had 50, 60 feet of beach 6, 7 years ago. And we used, and the city of South Haven was talking about how they could dredge the river, and Fred Upton was getting involved and all that kind of stuff up and down the So it depends. You have to look at it differently. You have to plan for both high and low is what I think one conclusion that came out. State being more proactive on these issues and providing guidance as well as resource opportunities, I would think would certainly was one. And various setbacks on the bluff. We have some homes being built that are getting permits, and I think it was discussed earlier in the presentation where people own property they want to build, and the permit DEQ or whoever they are these days have to try to do a balance of serving the individual property owners, and maybe this is something that the townships and city need to get engaged with. And then, whatever decision you make, there's always the legal aspect of what the cost is going to be going forward.
Thank you. Group 2, we've got Janet, Judy, Kevin, Linda, and Michael. I should say Lowell, sorry. So for that second group, I think, Michael, were you the report, or was it, no?
I took notes on it.
Yep, gotcha.
Folks from Casco Township discussed the fact that they're not really dealing with this at all. And so they said that overlay zones have been discussed, but they never gain any traction. They have issues with property rights being a big issue. Folks, they said there's a strong contingency of folks who don't want any more rules. People saying it's my property, I'm gonna do what I want. You can't tell me you can't tell me what to do with it. So it's a political issue there for sure. Within the city of South Haven, folks from the South Haven Planning Commission talked about having so many other issues right now on their plate, dealing with vacation rentals. They said that the Planning Commission meetings right now are 2 to 3 hours long, and that's a normal meeting for them. It's kind of one more item where it feels like they're being reactionary versus actually being able to get out ahead of items and do actual planning. And that's just I think an issue when you're taking on a whole lot of topics always at one time. Like they said, they feel like they're doing more problem solving than planning in general. South Haven Township talked about the issues with making changes once folks have already started building, or the fact that what's out there now is already in place, and the issues that go with that. So.
Yeah, I think that went along with creation of nonconformities is an issue. All right, thank you. All right, group 3, we have Clark, Janice, Phil, Rosalie, and Thomas. Anyone from group 3? So again, that was, I'm sorry, I might have named the wrong group. Apologies for that. Group 3 was Bob, Brad, Lou, Mark, and Scott. Who was the designated reporter from that group.
Mark, do you want to comment on anything? Oh, I think he's talking. You're just on mute.
I think the short answer to the question is on resilience. What are we doing in terms of addressing coastal community resilience? We're probably not doing enough. There are in the city some pretty good regulations in terms of setbacks and whether you can cut your bluff down. And there are good regulations working with Eagle in order to get approvals for revetments. But in terms of, and then I'll mention in the township, we did create a coastal overlay zone that requires additional approvals. for those areas that are not regulated by Eagle, to cut your bluff down. In other words, that will require engineering reports to assure that there will be no damage to adjoining properties. And we have created some new ordinances relating to setbacks above the high water mark. But in terms of the big picture of resilience, we're probably not doing enough in terms of looking at this and saying, all right, we're in a high water stage right now. What are the things that we should be really studying and planning for in terms of making sure the next time this happens, we're not caught without the ordinances and the regulations that we need. I think to a large extent, what we did in the township was reactionary. I'm glad we reacted. I wish we would have had things in place. We have done some things that I think will make it better. But there's so much more I think that we could be doing in all three communities. And I'll cede my time to other members of group number 3 to see if they have anything they'd like to add to this.
You covered. Good work.
Hey, Zach, I just wanted to point out, I think some of the things you said about the city were actually, he was referring to the township. Mark, is that right?
We did create a coastal overlay zone in the township, and we did create some new setbacks for new developments in the areas that are even controlled by Eagle. So Eagle's controlling, if an existing seawall's there, they're controlling from the seawall out, we're controlling from the seawall in, and we've created, I think, some improved ordinances, setbacks in those areas.
Is that South Haven Township or Casco?
South Haven Township.
South Haven Township. So Zach, the bullet below that is also South Haven Township.
That second bullet, that was the city though, correct?
Yeah.
Yes.
Great, thank you, Mark. Was there anybody else from group 3 that had anything?
I'll contribute. I can speak for the township. I'm contracted as a zoning administrator there. Speak for the city. The city does have an overlay zone as well, a coastal protection overlay zone. In effect, that does move with the changing shape of the dunes. I've only been down there for about 1.5 years now, but the one thing that we've been really trying to enforce, because there's been a lot of building along the lake, especially in the area of the high risk erosion areas and the bluffs, is that if there's any additions created to any existing structures or any, the structures are torn down and any new structures are created, that they have to meet the 30-year setbacks and the 60-year setbacks that are outlined by Eagle to do so. And in effect, that is dated from 1994, so that the 30-year setback regulation is actually going to be expiring within the next few years. So that in effect, if in the next couple of years, if they're planning on constructing something new, that they would actually have to set it back, depending on which one, up to 185 feet back from the bluff. So that's something that we are trying to be very adamant to support before we bring it through our 2-part process for approval.
Thank you. All right, let's go to group 4. All right, group 4, that was Clark, Janice, Phil, Rosalie, and Thomas. Who was our reporter for group 4? Or is someone talking right now that doesn't realize they're muted?
Clark, do I need to call on you again, Clark? Wake up.
Bueller. Bueller. No, I think you can go, you can handle this, Rosalie.
Okay, so yeah, no. The first answer is no. I know one thing, let's see. We talked a lot about moving forward. You know, with the city, we don't have that much open land. There's opportunity, I think, for setbacks and some good planning. A lot of our property is already built out. However, Clark had a good point, or was it Janice? I don't know who, that a lot of our folks are coming with new ideas. They want to add a deck or a pool, or they want to build out. So we do want to, we do need to revisit our ordinance. We do need to plan for this. We did discuss having had this kind of big knowledge previous. And I know Mr. Stegman has been in the community for a very long time and feels strongly that we let our zoning get out of hand in allowing some of this. It is a good opportunity for change though. And the challenge will be how to work with the property owners and just potential conflicts as we move forward when they want the revetments, and how we handle that and our relationship with Eagle and all of that. So I have to say, whoever said in the other group, the reactionary versus the proactive was absolutely right. We don't have the time to have these conversations. What did I miss, team? I wasn't prepared to speak.
Was there anything else from group 4? Or did Rosalie do it perfectly?
She did a nice job.
All right. Hearing nothing else from group 4, let's go to last but not least, group 5. That is Kathy, George, Joe, Kate, and Maureen.
Thanks, Zach. I was the reporter for our group. And once again, majority of our folks are from the South Haven city. I believe Maureen is from South Haven Township. We didn't necessarily go into too much into what the planning and zoning regulations currently are, but we came to 3 major conclusions, which was that there seems to be a misconception and misunderstanding as to which how the current regulations all work interdependently between the federal and the state and the locals, that the local government units didn't always understand or don't understand how far can they regulate building and planning and zoning issues. 2, we need to have more subject matter experts in helping us devise better codes, better setbacks, better planning, because it's a lot of information that we just don't know, either local appointed or staff members. So having those experts to help guide us, to help make decisions is very key. And then 3, this is the first step. Getting LIAA here, helping our 3 communities is the first step in recognizing our problem and that we have an issue and how can we help solve it.
Great, thank you. Okay, so for that second question, everything that's on here for kind of wrap up for the night, is there anything else that we should include from the group perspective? Reasons why some of these issues that have come up have not been dealt with or could not be dealt with. I think the issues you brought up make sense. I just want to make sure I've got all of them. Hearing none, I want to be cognizant of everyone's time. We're going a little further than I had planned on, but I think we got a lot of information, and I'm glad that we got this conversation going. Like I said, for these last I had originally had 5 questions. The remaining 3, in addition to the first 2, I'll put all 5 online. And I hope you'll encourage community members to also respond to these. And then with those last 3 that we weren't able to get to respond to them yourselves. We'll use a lot of these answers to guide the discussion that we have at a second meeting, which is to be decided. So let me just show real quick our next steps for this project going forward. Okay, so like I said, second meeting to be decided. So what I'll do is I'll look at the plans, the hazard mitigation plan, the master plan, any other relevant plans in each of the ordinances for the 3 municipalities, and kind of provide a report based on what I was talking about for that sustainability assessment tool of all the language, all of the codes, everything kind of in one document that shows what each of the municipalities are already doing, what's going on at the county level. So it's kind of a snapshot of everything that's happening. And then as well as a summary of the key findings from this meeting. We'll have all of that prepared. I'll send that out to everyone before we meet again. And then based on that information, we'll have another discussion to sort of bear down on some of those more actionable steps that can help remedy some of the issues that we've identified tonight and find some opportunities for improved sustainability. So as I mentioned, to keep up with the project, go ahead and use this URL right here, the resilientmichigan.org site. You can go there. There's a communities drop down. You can select South Haven. And like I said, you can go to the other communities pages to see some of the work that we've done in the past. And in the meantime, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. My email's right here. And this presentation, as I discussed with Kate, will be available as soon as we can. As soon as we can link it and embed it on our website, we'll send that out to you so that if you want to get that out to more of the public and post it on your websites, you're able to do so. I want to thank Dr. Norton for being here and for all of you for taking the time. I know, obviously, even what you said in the discussion, you've got a lot going on right now, so I completely appreciate you taking the time out of your busy day to talk about these issues. Before we wrap up, any questions, comments, concerns?
Yes, Mark Odland here. Quick question. Noticeably absent is Covert Township in Van Buren County, our township just to the south. Is there a reason for that?
Just the way that the project scope worked and how it went down. These were the 3 communities that were identified and what we scoped for.
Okay.
With any project, we want to work with as many communities as possible. It's just sort of how this one landed.
Yeah, I can't help but think that Van Buren County has such a small segment of the coastline compared to the overall, and Covert Township has a significant part of that. And I would just think it would be of tremendous value if they were part of these discussions. I'll just leave that at that. I think it would be a better project if they were engaged with us as opposed to not being engaged with us.
Thanks, Mark. Anything else before we wrap up?
Zach, I just wanted to reiterate, I'm happy to chat with anybody too if you want to. I know someone mentioned want to follow up. I'm happy. I didn't think to give you my email address, but you can get to me. You can go Google me. I'm famous. Woo. I don't think it's too hard to find me, but if you have trouble, Zach can certainly put you in touch with me, and I'm happy to chat.
On behalf of the city, I just really want to thank Zach Vega, Leah, and Dr. Dorn for coming and for this opportunity to work with our 3 communities.
All right. Well, again, thank you, everybody. And I hope to see you at meeting 2, time to be decided. You'll most likely get an email notification and remember to check that Resilient Michigan site for updates. But until then, thanks again, and I'll talk to you soon.